HAARP is officially dormant, running full diagnostics, syncing with NASA, and monitoring the ionosphere 24/7. It's doing that thing where you tell everyone you're totally fine and not thinking about them at all, while simultaneously driving past their house, memorizing their work schedule, and knowing exactly what they ordered for lunch on Tuesday. Hold on. Before we go further, you need to understand what HAARP actually is, because if you think it's a weather machine, you're about to feel very silly. HAARP is an ionospheric research facility using high-frequency radio waves to study the upper atmosphere, specifically the ionosphere, which sits between 90 and 400 kilometers above Earth's surface. The facility consists of 180 crossed dipole antennas spread across 33 acres, all capable of radiating 3.6 megawatts of power into the sky. It's enough power to run about 3,600 microwaves simultaneously, though I'm not sure what you'd be heating at that altitude. But the ionosphere is constantly being bombarded by the sun, which dumps vastly more energy into it every single second than HAARP could produce in a year. The idea that HAARP controls the weather is physically impossible because radio waves in the high-frequency range, 2.7 to 10 megahertz, don't interact with the neutral atmosphere where weather happens. Like a ghost passing through a wall, except the ghost is electromagnetic radiation and the wall is literally made of air. So no, HAARP isn't making hurricanes. It's studying plasma physics. Which sounds boring until you realize what that actually means. But here's where it gets weird. On February 9th at 3:30 in the morning local time, a separate NASA-sounding rocket launched to study black aurora, dark patches in the northern lights where you'd expect glowing curtains but instead see nothing. It's like the aurora called in sick that day. No note, no explanation, just darkness. To study these gaps, NASA used HAARP's ground sensors for baseline data. The facility was supposedly dormant, remember? But apparently dormant now means actively coordinating with federal space agencies. Which is fascinating because in every other context, standby means doing absolutely nothing. Now here's the context you need. On February 4th, 2026, an X8.1 solar flare erupted from the sun. The sun essentially hit the ionosphere with an electromagnetic haymaker. It saturated the D region and created what's called a short-wave fade-out, where high-frequency radio communications just stop working. This flare created a naturally heated environment in the ionosphere, days before the NASA rocket launches. So the ionosphere was already in chaos. And HAARP, despite being off, was watching it very carefully. But there's one problem with that explanation, a big one. At exactly 1:50:06 Universal Time Coordinated on February 11th, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Space Weather Prediction Center issued a 3-day forecast. Solar activity was transitioning from active to quiet to unsettled. But 5 days earlier, the same agency had issued a 27-day forecast indicating high probability of M-class flares and a chance for X-class flares. Is the sun calming down or gearing up for round 2? Because these forecasts read like a weather app that can't decide if you need an umbrella or sunscreen. And here's the kicker. Both forecasts cover exactly 72 hours into the future. 72 hours. That number is going to come back. A lot. It's like the universe's favorite number, or at least the government's. And that's when the timeline stops making sense. External observers, amateur radio operators, space weather enthusiasts, conspiracy theorists can see that HAARP's sensors are online. They can see the data streams, they can see the synchronization with Poker Flat research range. But the official story is that the facility is dormant. So here's the question. If HAARP is really dormant, why does it need real-time ionospheric monitoring coordinated with multi-million-dollar rocket missions? It's like claiming you're asleep while simultaneously filing your taxes and responding to work emails. Let's rewind. January 27th, 2026. That's when the most recent high-power HAARP research campaign began. For 5 days, the facility was transmitting at full power. Frequencies ranged between 2.75 megahertz and 10 megahertz. The 180 antennas pumped 3.6 megawatts of energy into the ionosphere, targeting the F region between 200 and 400 kilometers altitude and the E region between 90 and 150 kilometers. The goal was radio wave pumping, injecting energy to heat it, creating artificial plasma structures. Just think of it like a microwave oven for the sky. You're not cooking anything. You're just agitating electrons. And when you agitate electrons at that scale, things start glowing, which is either science or the origin story for a very confused superhero. Okay, pause. Because this is where the official story starts to fall apart. The campaign had 2 stated objectives. Objective 1, space debris detection. Objective 2, Steve and artificial airglow. Strong thermal emission velocity enhancement. HAARP was accelerating electrons to excite oxygen atoms, creating artificial luminous structures in the sky. Artificial auroras. They were literally changing the color of the night sky. So let me understand this correctly. They're heating the ionosphere to study space debris. which is a bit like setting your kitchen on fire to see if your smoke detector works. Space debris orbits between 400 and 2,000 kilometers. HAARP heats the ionosphere at 90 to 400 kilometers. It's like trying to find your keys by turning on the oven. Sure, technically both are in your house, but the logic is questionable. During the January campaign, operators used real-time data from the Gakona ionosonde to determine the F0, F2 critical frequency, the highest frequency that the ionosphere can reflect back to Earth. If you transmit above this frequency, your signal punches through into space. If you transmit below it, your signal gets absorbed or reflected. HAARP operators dynamically adjusted their transmissions depending on whether the goal was penetration or absorption. That's the radio equivalent of a chef adjusting the flame in real time while also somehow knowing exactly when your souffle will collapse. They're using a 3.6 megawatt transmitter to create artificial auroras, and they want you to believe this is just boring science. Now notice what just happened. We went from space debris detection to artificial light structures in the sky in about 3 sentences. That's not mission creep, that's Mission Olympic qualifying 400-meter dash. But here's what they don't tell you about those frequencies. While HAARP transmits high frequency, 2.7 to 10 megahertz, the facility can stimulate the ionosphere to emit something completely different. Extremely low frequency and very low frequency waves. That's 1 hertz to 20 kilohertz. And these are waves that can penetrate deep ocean and solid Earth. How? By modulating the auroral electrojet, a massive natural electric current flowing through the ionosphere at around 100 kilometers altitude. When HAARP heats the ionosphere, it creates ripples in this current, and those ripples act like a virtual antenna. An antenna with no physical structure, an antenna made of ionized air, an antenna that exists only in the conceptual space between "that's impossible" and "wait, that's happening right now." And that's when the ionosphere does something nobody expected. The virtual antenna doesn't just emit extremely low frequency waves, it focuses them. Earth's magnetic field causes these waves to propagate along specific pathways called ducts, stretching thousands of kilometers. Amateur radio operators have reported receiving signals from HAARP hundreds of miles away, signals that shouldn't exist based on normal radio propagation rules. Signals that are essentially the electromagnetic equivalent of getting a text message from someone who swears they don't have your number. So they turn the atmosphere into a transmitter, an invisible transmitter broadcasting frequencies capable of penetrating the ocean. And we're supposed to think this is normal, because the timing raises one very uncomfortable question. The January transmission window ended exactly 10 days before the NASA rocket launches. And here's the thing. After a major heating event, the F region electron density can take up to 72 hours to normalize. 72 hours. There's that number again. It keeps showing up like a relative you didn't invite to Thanksgiving, but who somehow has a key to your house. So if HAARP stopped transmitting on January 31st, the ionosphere should have fully recovered by February 3rd. But then the X8.1 solar flare hit on February 4th, reheating everything and pushing the recovery timeline forward another 72 hours. Which brings us to February 7th, and then the NASA rockets launched on February 9th and 10th during the recovery window. Coincidence? Maybe, but it's a very convenient coincidence. The kind of coincidence that makes you check the guest list twice. If you want to see more cases where the official story collapses, hit subscribe. Because we're about to go deeper. Wait, stop right there. Because this is where physics starts to sound like magic. HAARP creates a virtual antenna at 100 kilometers altitude. That's not a metaphor. That's the actual mechanism. The facility modulates the auroral electrojet by heating specific patches of plasma. When you heat plasma, its conductivity changes. When conductivity changes, the current changes. And when the current changes in a rhythmic pattern, it emits electromagnetic radiation. The facility is turning a layer of atmosphere into a broadcast tower. No physical antenna? No metal. Just ionized gas. Apparently, standby now includes turning the sky into a radio station, complete with programming no one asked for and a signal you can't tune out. Now here's where it gets really uncomfortable. The official explanation is that the modulation effects are obliterated naturally within seconds to 10 minutes after the transmitter shuts off. The electrojet is moving fast, several hundred meters per second, so any ripples get swept away almost immediately. Think of it like drawing patterns in a fast-moving stream. Fine, except the F region electron density takes up to 72 hours to normalize. So which is it? Do the effects disappear in seconds, or do they linger for days? The answer, apparently, is both. The extremely low frequency modulation disappears quickly, but the heated plasma remains disturbed for much longer. It's quantum logic applied to public relations. The effect both exists and doesn't exist until someone asks an uncomfortable question, which means HAARP can turn off the transmitter and the ionosphere will still be in a non-equilibrium state for 3 full days. And during those 3 days, the ionosphere is more reactive to everything else. Why, it's like leaving a bruise that makes the skin more sensitive for days afterward. But that 72-hour window? It shows up everywhere. The Space Weather Prediction Center issues forecasts in exactly 72-hour blocks. That's the standard operational planning window. Why? Because 72 hours is roughly the travel time for a coronal mass ejection to reach Earth. It's also the time it takes for the ionosphere to recover from a major disturbance. It's also the time between HAARP transmission windows. January 27th through January 31st. 5 days of transmission. Then 72 hours. Then NASA rockets. Then another 72 hours. Then the next scheduled campaign on March 1st. Like a cosmic metronome that just happens to be set to the exact rhythm of government research schedules. And when you dig into what those frequencies can actually do, things get very uncomfortable. Extremely low frequency waves can penetrate seawater to depths of several hundred meters. That's why submarines use extremely low frequency for communication. Very low frequency waves can propagate around the entire planet by bouncing between Earth's surface and the ionosphere. These frequencies don't get absorbed. They don't scatter, they just keep going. Like that one email chain from your high school reunion that somehow keeps finding you no matter how many times you change your address. Which raises the question, if you wanted to design a communication system that was impossible to block, intercept, or trace, what would it look like? Asking for a friend. Who works at the Pentagon? And HAARP can generate them by heating a patch of sky. Sound, the facility transmits high frequency, and the ionosphere converts it into extremely low frequency and very low frequency through modulated heating. It's frequency conversion without hardware. Just physics. And by just physics, I mean physics that sounds like it was written by someone who got bored with regular physics and decided to improvise. And here's the part that breaks the entire narrative. During the February 10th rocket launch, HAARP's induction magnetometer measured ultra-low frequency waves, which oscillate slower than a human heartbeat. And the magnetometer detected them, days after the transmitter shut off. So either the ionosphere was still ringing like a bell from the January campaign, or the sun was doing something unusual, or both. The official explanation is natural magnetic perturbations, which is convenient, because it's unfalsifiable. It's the scientific equivalent of a wizard did it. Except the wizard has a PhD and a security clearance. The ripples disappear in 10 minutes, but the electron density takes 3 days to recover. You can say the effects are temporary and also say the ionosphere takes 72 hours to stabilize, and both are true depending on which effect you're talking about. It's Schrodinger's research facility, simultaneously active and dormant. It's bureaucratic judo. Use the complexity of the truth to deflect questions about the simplicity of the lie. Now here's where the story gets really convenient. October 23rd, 2024, that's when ATNA Incorporated reacquired the 5,408 acres of HAARP land. The United States Air Force no longer owns the property. ATNA is a native corporation. The University of Alaska Fairbanks owns the equipment. ATNA owns the land. Public-private partnership. Except the transfer from the Department of Defense to a private corporation explicitly removes the facility from direct military control, which means Freedom of Information Act requests don't apply the same way, which means public access is even more restricted. And when people ask uncomfortable questions, the answer is now, sorry, that's private property. Talk to ATNA. But here's the catch. When the facility was military, we could at least request the research through the Freedom of Information Act. Now, private land, private contracts, good luck. It's like your landlord selling the building to a new company and suddenly your lease has 17 new clauses and a non-disclosure agreement. The official line is that the facility is open and unclassified. Tours are available. Researchers publish papers. Except access is restricted due to staffing shortages. Which is interesting because apparently they have enough staff to run a 24/7 diagnostic suite, but not enough to answer the door. There are no permanent military personnel on site. Just university researchers and contractors. Totally civilian. Totally benign. Except the Naval Research Laboratory, a Department of Defense agency, still funds specific experiments. So do NASA, the National Science Foundation, and the Air Force Office of Scientific Research. The money is still coming from federal agencies. The researchers are still conducting experiments that align with military interests. But technically, it's not a military facility anymore. So it's the institutional equivalent of I'm not touching you, while holding your finger an inch from someone's face. Conspiracy theories about HAARP have always centered on weather control and mind control. The weather control theory is physically impossible. Radio waves in the high-frequency range don't interact with the troposphere. The energy density from HAARP, less than 3 microwatts per square centimeter, is tens of thousands of times weaker than the sun's natural electromagnetic radiation. You can't control the weather with a signal that weak. Or more accurately, like trying to boil the ocean with a birthday candle, while the sun is literally right there doing most of the work. The mind control theory is equally absurd. The frequencies HAARP uses are nowhere near the frequencies associated with brain activity. Your brain operates on completely different frequencies. It's like trying to hack a computer using a kazoo. So if it's not weather control and it's not mind control, what are the Naval Research Laboratory and the Air Force actually funding? The Naval Research Laboratory is interested in HAARP for extremely low-frequency communication with submarines. The Air Force is interested in ionospheric propagation for over-the-horizon radar. NASA is interested in plasma physics and space weather forecasting. These are legitimate scientific and defense applications. But they do involve manipulating the ionosphere in ways that could theoretically interfere with communications, navigation, and satellite operations. Not as a weapon, as a research tool to understand how those systems might fail during natural disturbances like solar storms. That's the official story. And it's probably true. But here's the thing about official stories. They're designed to be plausible, not complete. They're the institutional equivalent of a movie trailer, technically accurate, but strategically edited to avoid spoilers. Drop your theory in the comments. Does the official explanation actually fit the evidence? Because if HAARP is really just a university project now, why is the Navy still writing checks? The facility is not hiding evidence. It's simply powered down between campaigns to save money, so the transmitter stays off most of the time. But the diagnostic suite, that runs continuously, because the ionosphere is always doing something. And when something interesting happens, the sensors are already in place, already recording, already synchronized. It's the research equivalent of claiming you're on vacation while still checking your email every 10 minutes. And here's the thing about convenience. It cuts both ways. If the facility is conducting benign research, the secrecy is unnecessary. If it's conducting classified research, the open and unclassified narrative is a lie. Either it's transparent and boring, or it's secretive and interesting. The official position is transparent and boring. The operational reality is that access is restricted, data is selectively released, and funding comes from defense agencies. They're parallel lines that somehow meet in the middle, which would violate Euclidean geometry if it weren't already violating common sense. March 1st, 2026. That's the next confirmed research campaign. The transmission plan includes 7 specific frequencies: 2.8, 3.25, 3.3, 4.1, 5.4, 6.8, and 9.6 megahertz. Why those frequencies? Because they correspond to specific ionospheric resonances and propagation modes. It's systematic, it's methodical. It's like watching someone practice picking locks and claiming they're just really interested in the history of metalworking. And this is where every explanation falls apart. The facility claims to be studying natural ionospheric processes, but the experiments involve injecting artificial energy to create artificial plasma structures that don't exist in nature. The facility claims the effects are temporary and negligible, but the ionosphere takes 72 hours to recover. Why the facility claims to be open and unclassified, but access is restricted, funding comes from defense agencies, and the land is privately owned. Every piece is technically true, but when you put them together, they don't make sense. It's a jigsaw puzzle where all the pieces fit, but the final image is just a picture of another, smaller jigsaw puzzle. And then there's the Polar Aeronomy and Radio Science Summer School, scheduled for August 4th through 13th, 2026. Students will be brought to the site for active experiments. They'll learn how to operate the transmitter. They'll publish papers. It's educational. It's transparent. It's also a way to normalize the facility's operations by integrating them into academic curricula. If students are running the experiments, it can't be that secretive, right? Except the students don't control the funding. They don't set the research agenda. They're extras in a movie who think they're the stars. Because when something goes wrong, hypothetically, it's the students who get blamed, not the agencies who approved the frequency list. And when you compare the official story to the actual physics, something doesn't add up. The energy from HAARP is tens of thousands of times weaker than the sun. That's true. But here's the catch. HAARP's energy is focused and modulated. It's not a broad spectrum wash like sunlight. It's a coherent signal targeting specific altitudes and frequencies. That makes it disproportionately effective. It's the difference between yelling in a crowded room and whispering directly into someone's ear. One is louder, but the other is way more effective. The official story emphasizes the weakness of the total energy. The physics emphasizes the precision of the delivery. And precision, as any engineer will tell you, is what separates a tool from a weapon. So the real question isn't whether HAARP is active right now, it's what they're preparing for next month. The facility is technically dormant. The generators are off. The transmitter is silent, but the diagnostic suite is running. The ionosphere is recovering from a massive solar injection. NASA rockets are launching, and the next campaign starts in 18 days. So is HAARP active right now? Technically, no. But if you define active as operationally engaged, well, the answer gets a lot more complicated. It's the difference between being asleep and being in a coma. Technically, both involve lying down with your eyes closed, but the level of engagement is wildly different. And here's the thing about patterns. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. High-power transmissions can generate ducts, or density perturbations that stretch along magnetic field lines, potentially trapping waves. This is real. It's called field-aligned irregularities. When you heat the ionosphere unevenly, the plasma follows the magnetic field lines, creating channels where waves propagate more efficiently. These ducts can persist for hours, even after the heating stops, which raises a very uncomfortable question. What if the effects we're told are temporary, aren't actually temporary at all? And what if they're cumulative? So when HAARP shuts off, the ionosphere doesn't immediately return to its preheated state. It lingers. And during that period, it's more susceptible to natural disturbances, which means a facility that's off can still be influencing the environment, not actively, passively. By creating conditions that make the ionosphere more reactive to whatever comes next, it's like leaving a dent in a mattress. You're not sitting on it anymore, but your presence is still very much felt. The facility is off, but they've already scheduled the next campaign. The ionosphere is recovering, but they're monitoring it 24/7. The pattern doesn't exist, but it shows up every 72 hours. And here's what makes this so effective as a cover. The conspiracy theories are so absurd that debunking them makes the real story invisible. You spend so much time explaining why HAARP can't control hurricanes that nobody asks what it can do. It's the perfect smokescreen. How it's like a magician waving one hand dramatically while the other hand does all the actual work. Except both hands belong to the government, and the trick involves the ionosphere. If this investigation disturbed your reality, share it. Let's make people uncomfortable together. Because the real question isn't whether HAARP is dangerous, it's whether we're asking the right questions. The official story is that HAARP is a research facility studying ionospheric physics. That's true. The unofficial story is that a HAARP is a weapon capable of controlling mines, weather, and earthquakes. That's false. But between those extremes is a third possibility. HAARP is a dual-use technology. It's a research tool that also has potential applications in communication, navigation, and electronic warfare. Not because it's designed as a weapon, but because understanding the ionosphere has strategic value. If you know how the ionosphere responds to disturbances, you can predict how radio signals propagate. If you can predict propagation, you can optimize communication systems. If you can optimize communication, you have an advantage. It's not nefarious, it's just pragmatic. But pragmatism doesn't make for good transparency. Pragmatism is what you call strategy when you don't want to admit you're being strategic. So you have to decide, is HAARP a harmless science project that just happens to align with every suspicious pattern? Or is the official story suspiciously convenient? The facility does exactly what it claims to do. It heats the ionosphere to study plasma physics. But the reasons for studying plasma physics are more complicated than pure science. There are defense applications. There are commercial applications. There are geopolitical implications. And those implications are rarely discussed because they're boring and technical. So the conspiracy theories fill the void, and the official story becomes a shield against scrutiny rather than an invitation to understand. As of February 11th, 2026, HAARP is technically dormant. The generators are off. The transmitter is silent. But the diagnostic suite is running. The ionosphere is recovering. NASA rockets are launching, and the next campaign starts in 18 days. The frequencies are already selected. The schedule is already published. The students are already enrolled. Everything is out in the open. Everything is transparent. Everything is exactly as it should be, except for the 72-hour pattern that keeps appearing in the data, except for the NASA rockets that launch during the recovery window, except for the fact that a dormant facility still monitors the ionosphere with the same intensity as an active one. But sure, there's nothing to see here. Just science, just patterns, just the heartbeat of the sun, perfectly synchronized with a facility that can turn the atmosphere into an antenna. And if you believe that's a coincidence, I have 72 hours worth of data that would love to have a word with you. And trust me, that data has a lot to say. It's been recording this whole time, remember?